Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. And friends, welcome back. We are with attorney Jeff Roberts down in Murray, Callaway County, and today we're going to talk about some of the interesting findings regarding injuries to minors. Jeff, good to see you again. How are you?
Good to see you, Jim. How are you?
Buddy, I'm doing fine. And let me clarify this. This isn't minors like the guys in there getting the cold. This is people below the age of 18 for this report. This are, the kids that get to the high school jobs and the early jobs as they're starting out. And the Commonwealth of Kentucky actually keeps tabs on what happens. But interestingly, I think this is an area that most people don't really even think about. Minors getting hurt in the workforce, they're still eligible.
Yes, they're still eligible for workers' compensation benefits. And where we're getting the statistics from, the Department of Workers' Claims will put out a report annually about, and it covers a variety of things. It covers injuries to minors is one of the things that is included in here, various injuries by body parts, injuries by different counties, occupational injuries versus occupational disease versus hearing loss claims, the number of first reports of injuries filed versus the number of claim filed.
And we'll come back because that's an interesting discrepancy. That would confuse me when we start. And also the different types of injuries by industry segment, right?
By industry segment as well. And then like it's a breakdown between those, like on the minors injuries, then it talks about breakdown by the industries as far as the number of injuries per different classification that the Department of Workers' Claims uses. And then it does go into, this report also goes into the number of claims filed, the number of claims resolved by settlement versus judgment by an administrative law judge, number of appeals to the Workers' Comp Board that are resolved from that. And there can be some overlap from that standpoint because some claims go, they may be filed in October and not resolved until the next year, or an appeal can take a little bit of time. Now, this report is based on the fiscal year that Kentucky goes by, which I believe is July 1st to June 30th, if I'm not mistaken, from that standpoint, as opposed to the calendar year. But there can be an overlap where a claim was filed one year and still pending the next year, so that can affect some of the numbers.
That makes sense. And just for reference, we're using the most recently available information, which is actually from the 2021-2022 timeframe. So the new report will be out probably in a month or two.
Yeah.
And we'll come back and touch on some of that as well.
I believe that's correct. The 2022-2023 report was not out when I looked at this to prepare for today's podcast. It was not out. My recollection is that the Commissioner for the Department of Workers' Claims gives a report every legislative session about the activities of the Department of Workers' Claims, and that's a big part of what this annual report is compiled for, is for that report, and that usually occurs a little later in the session. So I suspect the 2022-2023 report will probably be issued sometime in February timeframe for in preparation for the commissioner's testimony before the legislature in Kentucky.
That makes a lot of sense. And friends, if you're familiar with these podcasts, there are show notes that you can find where if you're listening to the podcast, if you scroll down, usually you see a big series of paragraphs. I'll put a link to this actual report in there. So if you want to go back and look at it, it's available. It's interesting information, things to be aware of. But I know as a parent, this is something that, if I've got a kiddo out there working, hey, congratulations, your kid's out there working. That's a good thing. But you really just don't think about workers' comp, in your child being injured. You just don't really put those two together.
You don't. It's not something that a lot of parents think about. A lot of kids will start work at age 16 and go into the public workforce at that point in time. In Western Kentucky, where my practice is located at, it's a very rural community, a lot of farms, and you have kids that grow up on farms or have, or at least in a rural area, that go to work on a farm My first paid employment was working hauling hay and setting tobacco and things of that nature. Well before I was 16 years of age, I was doing those type of activities. My father-in-law raised tobacco for years and years and years, and my daughter helped set tobacco and do stuff on the farm with him. Before she turned 16. She started public employment when she turned 16 as well. So in this area, you will have some of that, some younger workers starting even before in family businesses or farming and things of that nature. But a lot of kids start work at age 16 or 17, and unfortunately, they can get injured in those jobs.
And that's the thing, parents. Kentucky has a fantastic workers' compensation program. The laws for workers' comp to protect workers with some pretty good benefits exist. And Jeff, you've talked about that in many of our episodes. I mean, this is episode 70. We've covered a lot of topics under workers' comp, but it's a really good program compared to other states.
Kentucky's program is better than a lot of surrounding states from that standpoint. Now, Kentucky has cut benefits to injured workers over my career at this point. But the premiums for the employers have come down drastically as a result of those cuts to the benefits from that standpoint. But Kentucky is still better than some of their surrounding states in that regard. I'd actually like to see some of the benefits increase for the injured workers. I think that with the reduction in the premiums that should occur, but I don't foresee that occurring anytime in the foreseeable future anyway. Hopefully, eventually that will come back to where there's some better benefits for the workers in regard to some things, but you never can tell what's going to happen in that regard. But one of the better benefits is the medical side in Kentucky, and with medical, regardless of the age of the worker, if you're hurt on the job, workers' comp should be paying all of your medical associated with that injury, all the reasonable and necessary medical associated with that injury. There's no co-pays, no deductibles, or anything else that you shouldn't be any money out of pocket for a work-related injury.
That's again, it's as much as it's been reduced, it's still pretty daggone competitive in terms of the other states. And
Correct.
And that's, I'm glad Kentucky's done that. I'm glad you guys have been able to keep that in place and really advocate on behalf of the injured workers. But at the same time, there's a recognition here that we value work as a state here in the Commonwealth, and that's it's good to see the workers being protected.
Correct.
Let's jump into some of the data here for the young miners. Interestingly enough, one injury was actually reported for a worker who was 13 years of age, 5 for workers who were 14 years of age, 43 for workers who were 15 years of age, 171 for workers 16 years of age, and 423 injuries were reported for workers who were 17 years of age. And I think that number escalates because they're probably given more complicated jobs. They might be working with some machinery and things like that the older they get.
Well, I think that's probably true. Plus, you have more 16 and 17-year-olds in the workforce than you do under 16 years of age. So I think that's the reason you see that big jump in the number of injuries at 16 going from 43 at age 15 to 171 at age 16. I think a big part of that is because there's a lot more 16-year-olds in the workforce. The one that really shocked me, though, frankly, the number of injuries for children under 16 was somewhat surprising from that, but a 13-year-old having one injury at 13, it doesn't say what job they were doing or anything else. It doesn't identify that for the 13-year-old, but I was surprised because from a federal law standpoint, generally there's exceptions to nearly every rule, but generally 14 is the age that you can start working. You got to meet some certain guidelines from that standpoint. So seeing a 13-year-old that had an injury was somewhat surprising. But I mentioned earlier that I started hauling hay when I was a younger individual, and I think I was probably 11 or 12 when I started hauling hay for farmers from that standpoint. So that very well could be the situation. Here is a 13-year-old that was working on a family farm or working on a farm doing something like that that had an injury. Normally, at least for and still the law in Kentucky is agriculture work is excluded under the Workers' Compensation Act generally, but the farmer can elect to come under the Workers' Compensation Act by purchasing workers' comp insurance coverage. And I'm seeing in my practice more and more farmers purchasing workers' comp insurance coverage. I think the biggest reason for that is because they're getting the migrant workers, and federal law requires if you have a migrant worker on your farm, you have to have workers' comp coverage. So a lot of farmers now do have workers' comp coverage because they have the migrant workers. So I'm kind of wondering if that wasn't the situation. It was a farm injury, and they had workers' comp coverage because they had migrant workers, and so it ended up being pursued under workers' comp because of that situation. But I don't know for sure.
And I would think as a farmer, you have to cover all the employees at that point. You can't really cover just the migrant workers, and anybody else that's non-migrant. They're excluded. Once you buy, it covers everybody, right?
It covers the business. So if you're Roberts Farm LLC is going to cover every employee of Roberts Farm LLC.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's jump into a quick breakout. Well, before we do, I wanted to come back because overall, if you look at this report, the numbers tended to be lower in this reporting year, 2021 to 2022, than the historical factors. But the first-time reports of injury, that number confused me because that's not actual claims. That's just, hey, you have a duty to notify. You've been injured, so you got to go tell a supervisor, right?
Correct. That's a situation where when you're injured on the job, you're supposed to notify your somebody above you in the chain of command, and then they're supposed to eventually the employer is supposed to notify their workers' comp insurance company, and then the workers' comp insurance company notifies the Department of Workers' Claims. So even if there's no medical treatment, if you're working at a factory and you cut your hand and clean it off, put a Band-Aid on it, but your supervisor's aware of it. It gets reported up the line, reported to the insurance company. Then it would get reported to the Department of Workers' Claims. Even if you seek no medical treatment for that, it's still going to go down and be included as a first report of injury from that standpoint. So. You have, when you look at the numbers of the first reports of injury versus the claims filed, first reports of injuries is always substantially greater than the number of claims filed per year. And a big part of that is a lot of the injuries aren't significant. Another part of it is some people never pursue the claims from that standpoint, but some of them are just minor injuries, no medical treatment or very limited medical treatment associated with those, but they get reported as an injury.
Well, and one other clarification, this time frame, 2021, we were still dealing with the pandemic, so that was probably in those numbers as well. So some of that could have skewed that upward.
Yeah, you saw the number of first reports of injury, or because in that we call it first reports of injury, but it's actually first reports injury, occupational disease, hearing loss. Any of those would classify under that standpoint. And so, if you look at the first reports, they did increase in 2020 to some extent, and stayed high for through 2022, if I recall. And when you read through it, you look at a lot of those were COVID. If somebody caught COVID at work, then and they were off for that, unless they had long COVID, some prolonged problems from COVID, then there wasn't a claim filed, but there was a report made. The medical treatment may have been covered from it, may have been some lost wage benefits paid as well because of that, but there wasn't a formal claim filed for permanent disability benefits in that setting. So you had a bump for those years because of COVID from that standpoint. So those numbers are skewed a little bit because of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, okay, so let's start drilling down into the types of injuries that we're seeing. And for anybody that's following along, I'm pulling this data off of page 17 of that report. By far, the largest industrial classification category, deals with those who are working in accommodations and food services. And for miners, I mean that's probably a pretty common type of job to have. You're going to go to McDonald's, you're going to go down to Burger King, you're going to go to Taco Bell, something like that, and get that first job.
Exactly, and that's what, and we're strictly talking about minors here as far as the classifications on this, that did not surprise me to see that industry having the most reports, because frankly that is where I think you see the most minors working in those type of industries, the fast food restaurants or any type of restaurant. From that standpoint, you see a lot of younger workers in those settings, and the fast food is kind of, that is the start of a lot of people's public employment. My first job was at a fast food restaurant, and worked at a other jobs in there as well, but worked at a fast food restaurant for part of my college career as well. And I think that's just kind of a normal starting job, get yourself into the workforce type of job. So it didn't surprise me to see those. And having worked in that industry for several years when I was a kid, that is an industry where you can see burns and other things occur. And depending on the restaurant you work at, there can be some pretty decent lifting requirements in those type of jobs as well. So you can see, even though you kind of think of younger people not injuring their back from lifting, like a 60-year-old worker, or a worker close to my age doing that from that activity, but you can, and those injuries can occur in that setting. So I was not really surprised. If you'd asked me beforehand what would be the biggest industry for teenagers to get hurt in, I probably would have said food service.
It just kind of makes sense, right?
Yes.
And interestingly, when you start breaking out the types of industry or the types of injuries in this overall report, falls and slips. And if you've ever been behind the counter in a fast food restaurant, it's an ice skating rink back there because of the grease on the floor.
Yes.
I could definitely see that. So you're going to have some back injuries. I mean, you're probably going to have some maybe a knee injury here and there, and some different strains and things like that, I would think.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to see those type of injuries. When I worked at the fast food restaurants, a couple of them, and the floor would get pretty slick at times from that, and depending on the restaurant you work at, you have rushes. I worked a lot of Friday nights, and after the football game was over with, there would be a big crowd come into the McDonald's that I worked at, and you're trying to get the food out to the customers in that point in time, and things get on the floor, and it can be kind of slippery at that point in time. So that doesn't surprise me. Those would be a big portion of injuries for miners in those settings.
Yeah, well, I would think you're around the deep fryers, you're around the flat top, griddles and things like that. There's still some dangerous elements in a fast food restaurant. Asking anybody's ever worked in one.
Yes, exactly.
That's for sure. So the next category we get into, and this makes a lot of sense: retail trade.
Yeah.
A lot of people getting injured in the retail trade, and that could be a lot of things. There could be tripping, in the store somewhere, slipping on something. Maybe there's something on the surface of the floor. Also, you're probably unpacking and new merchandise that's coming in. So maybe you've got one of those little razor knives and things like that, scissors and stuff. So cuts and punctures and things like that are bound to happen. Not to mention just straining your back.
Exactly. I think that's the same kind of situation. That's another area that is where you see a lot of younger individuals get their first start into the workforce.
Great way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And so you see that, and that can, depending on the retail store, some of the product can be fairly heavy from that standpoint. But even when you're dealing with lighter product, when it comes in on the truck, it's in boxes, and until you break it down, it can be a pretty heavy box. So lifting from that standpoint, and again, the slip and falls, trip and falls with things jutting out into the walkways at times. That again did not surprise me that retail was high, and we're not talking an excessive huge number here because the teenage market, which is essentially, we're talking up to age 18, that's a small segment of the workforce from that standpoint. In the food service industry, I think we had a total of 205 injuries.
Statewide.
Statewide, yes.
Yeah.
From that standpoint, retail was 140. So not a huge number compared to all,
Yeah, from
over 18.
18 to 65.
18 to
bulk.
65 or 18 to 70 age force from that standpoint. But some of these injuries could be very, very serious injuries from that setting. So even though it's a smaller number, it can have a huge impact on the person who is injured in that family.
Well, yeah, especially if you're that parent going, oh, wait a minute, what's going on? Maybe so-and-so was a competitive athlete. Maybe they had a scholarship opportunity coming up. There are all sorts of different things could happen. And, when you get those injuries as a kid, yeah, most of the time you recover, but sometimes, it can throw you off track.
It can. That's true. And that's one of the things from the medical side, and there not being any cost to the medical treatment. Hopefully the child is covered under health insurance with their parents from that standpoint. But even if they're not, they can get medical treatment. And that's one thing that the parents need to know is, okay, my child got hurt at work. Am I, and they're an employee, they don't need to worry about, can I afford to pay for their medical treatment to make sure they get the best medical treatment possible. They should not have to pay anything for that medical treatment. So make sure your child is getting the treatment. And even if you're in a situation where paying a medical bill could upset your budget in paying the other bills that you have, you don't have to worry about that. If it's a work-related injury for your child, it should be covered under workers' comp. You should not be out anything.
Well, and I know in a previous episode, we talked about some of the expenses that you can actually reimburse. So if you have to take your child out of town to see a specialist, that mileage is reimbursable depending on what type of situation it is. Even an overnight stay and some meals may also be reimbursable. So again, the Kentucky system is set out there to really take care of people, and especially the kiddos like that, because you're probably going to have to travel with an adult, and there are allowances made for that, I would think.
There are allowances made for that, and then out of state treatment or out of the area treatment. Western Kentucky is a great place to live, and we've got great doctors here, but pediatric specialists, sometimes you may have to travel to see a specialist that specializes in a certain area for pediatrics, pediatric ophthalmologist. I don't know of any in Western Kentucky. There may be some, I don't know, because I haven't looked in since my daughter was young. From that standpoint, but when I did look, then Nashville and Cape Girardeau were the two closest places for that specialty. I don't know if there was a pediatric neurologist or a neurosurgeon in Western Kentucky. So if you've got a kid with a back injury, you may want to go see a specialist at that is specialist not only in the area of the injury, but also pediatric, or at least has a good understanding and treats other pediatric patients. So
that makes sense. And friends, I'm going to put a link to that particular episode. And I want to clarify this. You look for episode 68. Now, there were two things that we talked about in episode 68, the workers' comp designated physicians form. And that's actually the title because we spent the bulk of the episode talking about that. But the back half of that episode deals specifically with those reimbursable expenses. So again, don't let the title of that episode fool you. There is some really good information in there. At least we thought so.
Of course.
And Jeff, let's jump into the third category here: transportation and warehousing. In terms of the injuries to minors in Kentucky during the period 2021 to 2022, and that's where the heavy lifting really comes in, I would think.
It does. That's actually the one that surprised me when I saw that as being the third category for injuries. There was 115 injuries in that category, and when I think of the transportation industry, I'm not thinking of people under 18, kids under 18 years of age when I'm thinking of transportation. Now, and I don't know, Domino's Delivery and some of these other companies that do delivery may hire someone under 18. I'd be somewhat surprised if they did, to be honest, but they may. And that could be part of it. The warehousing, though, is where I suspect a lot of that is. And that's going to be a lifting requirement in the warehousing. Still somewhat surprised that warehousing would have very many under 18 as well, but you just never know from that standpoint. And so it could be, and they may be someone who has a GED or graduated at 17 and then went into those type of workforces. But that's an industry, transportation and warehousing, where you see in the adult classification, the adult number of injuries, you're going to see that as being one that you have a decent number of injuries in as well.
Absolutely. Hard job.
Yeah, that's a very hard job. And that's the warehousing, a lot of times that's a lot of lifting involved in that. And people operating forklifts and product being knocked over or falling over, and you see that's just an industry. I do see a decent number of injuries and representing a lot of people in those type of industries. So
yeah, it always scared me when I looked at that classification. The last thing I ever want to see behind me on the road is the 16-year-old with the cell phone driving a big rig. Let's assume that's more warehousing.
Yeah, let's hope it's more warehousing. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was in the transportation. I don't know exactly what all they're referring to from that standpoint, but I'm pretty comfortable warehousing is where those injuries are occurring.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, I would think so. So Jeff, let's wrap up the discussion here with a little bit of overview of your practice. I mean, for many years now, you've handled workers' comp. You do a lot of personal injury work as well, and some Social Security disability benefit claims. Now, your primary office is here in Murray, Callaway County. I mean, but you handle these cases all across the Commonwealth. And actually, recently, you opened up your second office up there in Hopkinsville in Christian County.
Correct. Yes, I have my main office in Murray, which is where I've been practicing in Murray since 1992, and I have a satellite office that's by appointment only in Hopkinsville, where I meet with clients up in that area. It just, when I looked at it and looked at the number of attorneys in that area that handle workers' comp, there's a lot of attorneys who do not handle workers' comp. Very few of us that actually do handle workers' compensation type cases. And when I looked at Hopkinsville for the size of that community and the number of attorneys that handled workers' comp, it just seemed like that area was being underserved. So I opened up that satellite office, and I already had several clients from that area that would travel to Murray to meet with me, or we do a lot of it over the phone and now by video conference from that standpoint. But I thought I like face-to-face meetings from that standpoint, so I thought opening that office would be helpful, and it has turned out to be very helpful for the clients up in that area. But I do, as you mentioned, I represent people all over the state. I have clients currently that are in Bowling Green area, in the Louisville area, and several places in between, several additional cities outside of what I consider the Western Kentucky area. From that, I know Western Kentucky University is in Bowling Green. I don't consider Bowling Green to be Western Kentucky personally, but that's just me.
Spoken as a Murray grad.
Or anybody else that lives in true Western Kentucky. But no, that's I'm teasing from that standpoint, because that is a joke here. You look at the map and about the center of Kentucky's Bowling Green, and well, let's put the Western Kentucky University there. But that's, it doesn't matter to me from that perspective. But when you talk Trigg Christian, in west of that area, that's there's very few counties and communities in those areas that I don't have clients in all the time, just because of that's the main client base. But I handle cases all over from that standpoint.
Well, and you get a lot of referrals from your colleagues who maybe they either don't do comp or they just need somebody that's got your experience in a certain issue, and they tend to reach out to you and say, "Hey, could you help out on this case?"
Yes, I've got some attorneys in other communities, yes, that do not do workers' comp. And so if they've got a car wreck case that's got a comp component to that, they may bring me in to handle the comp component with them. And we coordinate together on that. Or if they just got, if a past client or a friend or family member that's got a comp claim, and they will ask me if I would get involved in that regard. And frequently I will do that for them in those settings. So, yeah, if you've got, if we're talking about minors here. If your child got injured on the job and you've got questions about that, you can reach out to call me. If it's not a minor, if you got injured on the job yourself and you've got questions, you can reach out to me in that regard. Best way to reach me is to call my office at 270-753-0053 or 1-800-844-5108. You can also email me at jeff@jeffrobertslaw.com and reach out to me that way from that standpoint. But if you call the office during our business hours, you're most likely going to have a live person to answer that phone and to speak with you. If for some reason all the lines are busy, you'll get the voicemail, but that's very rare. Normally you're going to have a live person talking to you on the phone, and they will get the message to me, and then we'll try our best to get your questions answered.
Outstanding. Jeff, I want to thank you for your time. And parents out there, please don't forget, if your kiddo's been injured while they're out there working, trying to get some experience, trying to get a little extra money in their pocket, they are covered by Kentucky workers' compensation benefits. And don't be afraid to reach out and talk to Jeff about, hey, what options do I have here? I mean, is this serious enough? Should we pursue it? Better to get a qualified answer than to make some assumptions that actually could leave some money on the table for you and that minor. So, Jeff, once again, thank you for your time, buddy, and we'll see you back here in about 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.